22nd, I remember waking up on Christmas, so there's a 2 or 3 day span there that's just nothing to me. I woke up and things were considerably different than when I fell asleep. But I spent a couple days in the ICU down at UW-Madison and saw a whole bunch of doctors, and I can remember, one of the first things I remember was they were taking an IV out of my neck and unstitching it or whatever and taking that out. And the doctor says to me, one of the doctors who was into my surgery says, "Oh, if the doctor that's taking this out does anything to you, I'll gladly do the same to him just to keep the playing field even." And in an extremely drugged up haze, I responded, "I think you just kicked me in the balls." So I kept my sense of humor through all this. That's really how I got through it. Bucky the Badger came to visit me when I was in the ICU, but his head was too wide to fit through the doorway. Bam! And stepped back, turned sideways, and kind of inched through it. A man came in dressed like Santa Claus and talked about how he had knee surgery one time, and the worst part about it was his legs were so hairy, so when they pulled off the tape, it hurt that he would bleed. And he had his wrist fused once, but it was the wrist used to wipe himself in the bathroom, and it made that really difficult. This is all while I was still in the ICU. So eventually I get moved down to the pediatric floor, where once again I had fantastic nurses and doctors, and everything was going pretty well. I watched a heck of a lot of television, more than enough. I had to suffer through daytime television. I'm not a soap opera fan, so it makes the hours between about noon and 4 a little rough. Especially once the Price is Right ends, then there's not much to do for the rest of the day before prime time starts. So I was in the hospital a total of 10 days. They kind of rushed me out of there because there was a nasty flu going around the hospital, and being immunosuppressed after my transplant, they didn't really want me in there that long with this flu going around. And oddly enough, I remember leaving the hospital being one of the most terrifying experiences of my life. I remember thinking beforehand, you know, the moment I get to leave is going to be the happiest moment ever, but I was scared out of my mind because it was such a safe place there in the hospital. The doctors were there, people were there that could help me. And I also remember being really worried on the drive home that the seatbelt was going to irritate where I had my scar. It covers most of my stomach, so, but I put a pillow in front of it. That was my dad's ingenious idea, and it worked pretty well. I got home on New Year's Eve that year, and I spent a whole bunch of time with my family. I was out of school for a total of 2 weeks. It would have been 3 weeks, but thanks to winter break being conveniently placed over my surgery, I was okay. And the road to recovery was an interesting one. You have to attend classes after you have a transplant, at least at Madison, to learn a little bit about the drugs you're on and what's going on in your life now. And when I went to this in the hospital, they said, you know, it's about a quarter-mile walk through the hospital. It's on the adult transplant floor. That's pretty long. You on a wheelchair. And me thinking, quarter-mile walk, you know, I could do that in my sleep. That's no problem. Not realizing I just got out of the surgery 4 or 5 days ago. And that's the most exhausted I've felt in my entire life was when I got there. So there was definitely a learning curve to it, but 3 months after my surgery, I was skiing with my friends at Grand Peak in Wausau, so I was really excited about that. So luckily, in youth, you recover pretty quickly from everything. So I had my transplant in December of 2003, and that's supposed to, with primary sclerosing cholangitis, the disease I have, that's supposed to solve everything. Very rarely does the disease come back. Very rarely does anything really need to happen much other than, you know, your typical drug regimens and things like that after a transplant. But that's not the case with me. I've been in the hospital a couple times for recurrent infections, and had been over the years. Luckily, I never had to deal with rejection, but I had to deal with infections, which was it was rough only because it was so boring. You get there and you get put on antibiotics, you feel better within a day, and you have to sit there 4 or 5 days while everything clears out, and then you usually get sent home on antibiotics. Last year, first semester, it would have been second semester, I was in the hospital 3 times and didn't think a whole lot of it. It was 3 times within a very short span, and I thought it was just maybe the bug coming back afterwards. And then, once again, in December of this year, I went down to visit for my transplant visit. with the doctors. I thought it was going to be my lab numbers, my blood work is the best it ever had. And I thought it was going to be something really quick, you know, oh, hey, you're feeling fine, that's awesome, keep up the good work, we'll see you later. But my doctor was concerned for some reason, and I still have no idea how he caught it. And the cruel fate that computers are is that the computers were down that day, so my lab numbers from the morning hadn't been brought up, and this is all this last December. They're like, oh, they're probably fine, they've been good, but my doctor talked to me about scheduling what the heck was the name of the procedure? Regardless, a procedure to go into your liver with drains and try and get a biliary drain to drain some of the bile that's getting trapped up by my liver. This came as a shock to me. I remember being completely shocked, saying, I've been feeling fine, my numbers have been great, I don't know what the deal is here. Well, as we're walking out the door, my transplant coordinator, who's kind of the person you deal with day to day, he says, oh, hey, your lab numbers are in, take a look at these. And my GGT, which is the number we really watch, was back up in the 600s, and from like it was at about 100 the week before, and then it was up to about 600. And we're thinking, well, that's odd. And they're like, yeah, we're gonna try and schedule that procedure for either tomorrow or the day after. And this all came as quite a shock to me because I feel absolutely fine. I've been feeling great. Well, I wound up spiking a fever the day after, and getting a fever as a transplant patient is an extremely serious thing. It's not just like, oh, I'm going to lay down in my bed, sleep it off, get done. It's generally a sign of infection and something that you need to be hospitalized for. So the day after that transplant visit, I got a fever. We drove back to Madison in a terrible, terrible snowstorm, if you can remember last December. Got down there and they had the procedure and successfully placed a biliary drain in, which it's actually going right now. I've got a bag strapped to my leg that it's running into. And they dealt with the infection and things like that. And one of the days they walked in and told me, we're going to have to put you back on the transplant list. You're going to need another transplant. And it's something that I always kind of had in the back of my mind since I had an infection the first couple of times, something that I always thought could be a possibility. It was eating at the back of my head, but I never really admitted it to myself. And hearing it out loud at that time was pretty rough. But you know, we dealt with it in stride, and currently I'm still on the transplant list. I think I checked yesterday, and in this area for people with my blood type, there's currently 635 people waiting for a liver. And I'm pretty low on that list, so I've got a lot of people to beat out. But if they're sicker than me and they get a liver, I see that as perfectly fine. Since that first hospitalization when they placed the drain, I've been hospitalized again 3 times. I've missed 3 to 4 weeks of classes this semester due to it. I actually was in the hospital last week. I got discharged on Friday and came back and spent the weekend here. But it's been kind of a rough road since then, but it really isn't too bad. Going to the hospital, like I said, with an infection, if I get a fever, it's more frustrating because I'm going to be bored the next couple days and miss classes. Get put on antibiotics, get sent home. This year so far, I've spent more time with a PICC line in than I've had one out, which is basically a long-term IV to give yourself antibiotics for a few weeks. But thankfully, with this last discharge, I was able to come home on oral antibiotics, which is super awesome because the hardest thing is showering is difficult, so you have to get it covered with saran wrap, and covering yourself with saran wrap right here is a little hard, so I always had to have my roommate help her. James Bushman has helped me a couple times, which is awesome. But it's something that I'm very optimistic about, and it's something that with these experiences I wouldn't change it even if I had the opportunity to. It's really made me into the person I have today, and it really has truly taught me to take every day as special and be thankful that I've made it through the day and that I woke up another day is really what it is. And like I said, I wouldn't be the person I am standing here if it wasn't for this situation, and I'm very thankful that I got that 12-year-old boy at the time had walked into his living room a few years before and told his mom, if anything ever happens to me, I want to be an organ donor. And because of him, you know, I'm able to stand here in front of you guys today. And I'm just very thankful. And I guess in closing, I'd encourage everybody to be an organ donor just to help save everybody's life.